There are going to be factions that will erupt from countries. This we often call them rebels. These kind of groups are going to erupt in some countries who are not okay with their president and their governors. So they will start reacting, but not in a peaceful way. Let us pray for the world, but let us not forget Africa.
More than 2 years since the conflict began, Tigrayan rebels have started handing over weapons to Ethiopia's federal government. It's part of a peace agreement signed 2 months ago.
As per the agreement, disarmament needs to be carried out. We have disengaged from our front lines. TDF has also done the same. We have done this by agreement.
The leaders of the Tigrayan rebels dominated Ethiopia's politics and military for nearly 30 years. After Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed took office in 2018, they defected with a substantial faction of the army and its weapons. African Union inspectors were there to see them being handed back to the government.
We have seen the handing and taking over of military hardware by both the Tigrayan Defense Forces and Ethiopian National Defense Force.
The peace deal also stated that foreign forces should leave Tigray. Eritrea's army fought there on the Ethiopian government's side. Access to Tigray is restricted, but humanitarian workers say Eritrean soldiers are still there. They've been accused of executing and raping civilians. Activists say the Tigrayan rebels have been pushed into a corner.
They have been told in no uncertain terms by the AU and by the European Union and by the Americans that they have to accept whatever is offered to them. And what has been offered to them now is the trickling of aid in exchange for the total disarmament of the Tigray Defense Forces, the only forces that were protecting the Tigray people against the barbarity unleashed by Eritrean forces and the Ethiopian forces.
The UN estimates 500,000 people have died from violence and starvation during the conflict. Hundreds of thousands of others have been forced from their homes. People are still waiting to see if there'll be lasting peace or justice. Malcolm Webb, Al Jazeera.
M23, M23. These rebels, who are supposedly backed by Rwanda, have taken 2 more towns from the Congolese army. That is the town of Kichanga and the town of Kishishe. And this is 2 weeks after the M23 rebels handed over 2 other regions. That is Kibumba and I think the military camp of Rumangabo. You remember there was this ceremony as they handed over this camp to the Kenyan troops, the East African Regional Force, otherwise known as ICRAF. But at that same time, the M23 were making pincer movements, or basically outfoxing and outflanking the Congolese army, moving west deep into the Congolese territory. And that's when they started attacking more territories, including this particular town of Kichanga. And this town is a town of more than 60,000 people, so it's a huge town by the Congolese standards. And they have taken it over despite the Congolese trying to use even jets to bomb these rebels. They have taken over this town, and the same town there was a helicopter, a military helicopter that was shot down using man-pads by the M23. Of course, by now we know these man-pads are operated by Rwandan soldiers who are fighting alongside the M23. So they shot down a military helicopter, an Mi-24 gunship helicopter, which is owned by the Congolese army. And you recall that plane that we saw being shot at using a man-pad by the Rwandan soldiers as it approached the Goma airport, the Goma International Airport. Now that plane had finished a mission to try to bomb and root out these rebels as they were fighting with the Congolese army. But then when it was shot, no more planes or no more military support planes went back. So a day later, on Thursday, they managed to capture that town from the Congolese forces. New details have emerged that the Congolese army is planning, quietly planning for a full-scale military operation. The information indicates that there are more than 5 different locations or different camps where more than 50,000 new soldiers are being trained in Congo. They have been trained since November last year, and these new troops are going to be sent or deployed to the east to deal with M23 and possibly deal with the Rwandan threat.
Haiti is on the verge of the abyss. Now that's the language the United Nations is now using as heavily armed gangs expand their control of the country. Haitian human rights groups say armed groups control at least 60% of the capital, Port-au-Prince, and the surrounding areas. They're also warning rape is increasingly being used as a weapon. Well, in the first 6 months of this year, the UN has documented this: 934 killings in the capital, 680 kidnappings. Most of the victims were not directly involved in gangs, they were directly targeted by armed groups. The violence has escalated since the assassination of the country's sitting president, Jovenel Moïse. That was in July of 2021, and that's a crime for which no one has yet been put on trial in Haiti. Our senior international correspondent, Orla Guerin, sent this special report from the Haitian capital. I should warn you, her report contains some distressing material.
This is gang territory in Port-au-Prince, almost as far as the eye can see. But it seems the world isn't looking. And the Haitian capital has become a gangster's paradise. It's morning in a middle-class suburb. Minutes after a shootout, a show of force by the police. But usually it's the gangs who call the shots. There are over 100 armed groups in the city, instilling fear and silence. Well, police are still searching the scene here. There's an AK-47 on the ground and some ammunition. There are also drops of blood. Now, this is an armoured car. Police say they were tracking it for about 2 weeks. They say it was being used by a kidnap gang. It's about 8 in the morning here, and morning and evening rush hours are peak time for the kidnappers.
There was a battle with police officers and the bad guys. One of them died, and we got the vehicle, and this is one of the weapons the bad guys had in their hands.
Do they have many armoured vehicles, the kidnappers?
I don't know. There are plenty. I'm sure there are plenty.
Nearby, the body of an alleged gang member. The police told us we stopped them today. Across town, Francois St. Clair has just been patched up at a trauma hospital run by Doctors Without Borders. He saw gunmen holding up 2 cars in front of his. When he tried to get away, he got a bullet in the arm. Have you ever thought that the violence is so bad here that you would like to leave Haiti?
Oh, 10,000 fois.
10,000 times, he tells me. I can't even call my mum to tell her what happened to me because she's getting older.
Enfin, c'est mieux.
In the end, the way things are, it's better to leave if you can.
C'est bien.
Claudette is another recent victim of the gangs. She was hit by a stray bullet and lost her leg. I don't know how I'll manage, she says. I can't run and walk the way I used to. She worries she will never marry now. Gang warfare often erupts here in broad daylight. Why not? Gunmen are in league with corrupt politicians and have some police on the payroll. That's according to human rights campaigners who say the gangs of Port-au-Prince have no limits. There are many here with stories that are harrowing to tell and to hear, like this man. His neighborhood is controlled by a gang whose rivals came on a killing spree. For his safety, we are not naming the area or the armed group involved.
I was in the house and I was so scared, I was shaking. I didn't know what to do. They mostly kill young men. My wife took me and hid me under the bed and covered me with piles of clothes. And my nephew was hiding in the wardrobe.
Soon the gunmen were in his house.
The Hayat Hotel in Mogadishu turned into a battleground on Friday night. Al-Shabaab gunmen blasted their way into the building with 2 car bombs before seizing control of it. Somali security forces launched a counter-offensive. Witnesses say there were several explosions, followed by exchanges of gunfire that continued through the night and into Saturday. Al-Shabaab has claimed responsibility.
These types of attacks have been a hallmark of Al-Shabaab operations a couple years ago in particular, and they kind of slowed down a little bit, but we see them popping up again.
Footage from the scene shows extensive damage to the hotel. Several people have been taken to hospital. The victims reportedly include children as well as the hotel's owner.
These hotels are usually attacked because that's areas where government officials congregate. And so there's a lot of meetings, a lot of activity, especially right now with the new government coming into place and setting up a lot of its appointments and its positions. But there's also often been a secondary element to some of these. You know, Al-Shabaab runs a very extensive extortion racket within Mogadishu itself, and they've targeted business owners that haven't complied as well.
The armed group is affiliated to Al-Qaeda and has carried numerous attacks in Mogadishu in the past decade.
Congolese authorities say the attack was carried out at Beo Manyama village in the DRC's eastern province of North Kivu. A local leader says the gunmen stormed their village and opened fire on residents. A group of soldiers arrived at the scene to try and protect the locals, but 3 of them were killed. Authorities have blamed the attack on the Allied Democratic Forces militia, ADF. The radical group is accused of killing more than 1,000 civilians in eastern DRC since 2019. Civil society organizations had earlier said that 10 civilians and 3 soldiers were killed in that attack, but 7 other bodies were later discovered in a neighboring village, raising the death toll to 20. The DRC army is conducting joint operations with Ugandan troops against the ADF rebels, but the killing of civilians has continued. A regional force of troops from the East African community is expected to be deployed in the DRC to fight against all armed groups that refuse to lay down their arms. Chris Sochamringa, SABC News, Kinshasa.